Yan is the co-founder of Code Chrysalis, a coding bootcamp that has reshaped technical education in Japan. She made a huge career pivot from commodities trading in Singapore to software engineering after going through a coding bootcamp herself in San Francisco. She then moved to Japan to start Code Chrysalis with her co-founder, which has evolved from a pure coding bootcamp to become a major legendary force in training technical talent in Japanese IT giants. After almost a year of taking a step back from Code Chrysalis and embracing motherhood, Yan is now brewing her next step. It was wonderful to catch up with her and hear her perspective on the role of technical talent over the last few years in Japan, as well as how she expects things to drastically evolve with the AI shift. As always, thanks so much for tuning in and enjoy.
I wanted to get to know something that um, I wanted to get to know an area that I really had no knowledge of and no connection to.
Mm-hmm.
And the Middle East, especially the Arab world, is such a big part into the news,
Mm-hmm.
for especially like if you live in the US or grew up in the
Mm-hmm.
US, right? Like I grew up during like the whole 9/11
Mm-hmm.
stuff and then the war. And so I just wanted to get to know that region a lot better. And Arabic and language was probably the the easiest way to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Commodities trading, honestly, it was because I couldn't get any other jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like finance adjacent. And um, honestly, I was drawn to it because there was a lot of travel involved and I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to see the world. I didn't really get to travel at all growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And so this gave me the ability to travel the world. And in the beginning, I think I was thinking, oh, maybe this is like a good career to have, but
Mm-hmm.
it was very apparent within like the first 2 weeks that I had made a terrible choice.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, when you're 23, 22, 23, you don't really know any better. You don't know um, what work life should look like. And so I
Mm-hmm.
stuck it out for 2 years. And during those 2 years, I figured out how to get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Just
so,
Just out of
mhm.
curiosity, when you say it was very apparent that it wasn't the right path, what does that look like, that realization? Because I think it's hard
Mhm.
for you to go like, this is not my thing. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean? So what is that?
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, girl, I was falling asleep during orientation.
It
Like,
was so boring.
it was, yeah. And I think when I was trying to learn about it, I didn't think that I knew that the subject matter was not so complicated,
Mm,
but just something in my head refused to learn it and refused to understand it.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
I just had no patience or concentration for it.
mm-hmm,
And I went through a phase where I thought maybe I was stupid, but then I
mm-hmm,
would be able to learn other things
mm-hmm,
like
mm-hmm,
coding and be just fine. And so I realized that that's probably just my brain telling me that this was not a good
mm-hmm,
fit.
mm-hmm,
Um, and I think there was a part of me that didn't fully get it, as in
mm-hmm,
like, and it's hard to describe, but like, yeah, I don't know. Sometimes you're just in a job, or maybe see someone else in a job and they're underperforming. And the reason why they're underperforming is because they don't get it. Like they don't
mm-hmm,
understand the full scope of their job and why they're
mm-hmm,
there. And I think that was me in commodities
mm-hmm.
trading.
So it's like
Yeah.
why this job exists, why this industry exists, why you're doing this job,
Yeah.
all of it.
And then also like for me as an analyst in this company, like
Mm-hmm.
what am I supposed to be contributing?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like what part of this, like how am I as a cog going to fit into this? And I don't say that in like a demeaning way, but just like it's really important that I understand where I am within this company and how to
Mm-hmm.
navigate it. And I think that just I didn't really care at the end of the day. And
Mm-hmm.
I just my brain just sort of refused to learn.
Okay. I'm sure maybe that resonates with some of our listeners, maybe. Yeah, but yeah, I think it's a pretty big realization. But how do you go from commodities trading then to software engineer then?
Oh, it was because that was like in 2013, 2014, and that was when Silicon Valley was really having its emergence, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like kind of next, it's like next renaissance. So like
Mm-hmm.
Airbnb and Uber and like all of these companies that um, you know, are sort of ubiquitous now. They were just happening.
Mm,
And I've always been I'd always wanted to be an entrepreneur, like to start a company, mostly because
okay.
I wanted to be my own boss. And so I was looking at these and it really got me thinking about what businesses I could be launching.
Mm-hmm.
But everything that I thought of required some kind of like technical know-how.
Mm,
And I didn't have any of that. So to me, I thought it was like a very logical move to make
mm-hmm.
because I knew I couldn't stay in my current field. I
Mm,
felt like I didn't have any transferable skills or any skills at all,
mm,
any hard skills in particular to fall on. Um, I knew that if I became a software engineer, finding a job would be a little bit easier. I don't
mm,
think that's the case now.
mm-hmm. We can get
But
into that later.
yeah, yeah. But like at the time, it was like, if you were an engineer, like, you just get hired in a flash.
Mm,
And I wanted to see how the sausage was made.
mm-hmm.
So it was a very logical choice for me to make.
Mm-hmm.
And I was also seeing acquaintances or just classmates of mine who had, gotten the banking and consulting jobs in New York City that I really wanted but didn't get,
Mm-hmm.
moving over to San Francisco
Mm-hmm.
and working there. And they were working in like business strategy or marketing or like these other roles. And I think for me, I was like, well, I'm going to be a little bit different. I'm going to do what they're not doing.
Mm-hmm.
And th this was back when also like boot camps were really new. I remember when I was looking, there were only a handful of coding boot camps. It
Uh-huh.
was a totally new concept. People
Mm-hmm.
thought I was absolutely crazy because they're like, okay, so you're gonna quit your job and you're gonna fork over like $20,000 to this unaccredited thing.
Mm. So it
Um,
it wasn't seen as like an investment to for yourself or anything at that point.
No, no, most people were just shocked that I would do such a thing. Like they were like, "Well, I don't know. These are like pretty untested. Like it's
Mm,
shot in the dark, sort of, that's a really risky move."
yeah.
But I had a good feeling about it, and I talked to some alums, some of like the first alums.
Yeah.
And so I joined the boot camp when it was only about a year old.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was only about a year in. So yeah, and it worked out. I ended up finding a job as a software engineer. And it was during that time that I was helping out at that boot camp as well, like
Mm-hmm.
teaching classes. I was also volunteering at nonprofits
Mm-hmm.
in the San Francisco area to teach people how to code.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so I was doing that, helping, giving advice for people trying to make the same transition as me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and seeing like also like the holes in the system and where, things could be better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where you got your first exposure to boot camps because you went through one yourself and then you
Yeah, I
started.
went through one.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then also when I was in San Francisco, I helped launch one in the Middle
Mm,
East.
mm,
So I had experience with just like setting one up from the very beginning all the way
mm-hmm.
through like graduating a class and helping them find jobs.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow. This was back in
That was 2016 or so.
2016. Okay.
Yeah.
So there were
Yeah.
a lot of like openings for software engineering jobs around San Francisco.
Tons. Yeah, tons of openings. It's a very different market now. But
Mm-hmm.
again, this was when like VC money, venture capital money was like everywhere and
Mm-hmm.
just funding this like great tidal wave of random apps and projects, most of which have failed, but we're
Mm-hmm.
left with some nice things after that. So yeah, there were jobs everywhere.
Wow. Damn. It must look very different now for software engineers.
Yeah, it's a very different world. There's a lot of hiring freezes.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there's been just waves of layoffs in the US.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, certainly. is certainly a rough time in the
Mm,
industry. And I don't know if it's going to, I don't think it's going to, I don't think it's going to recover necessarily in terms
why is
of
that?
like the software engineering market, like job market.
Why is that?
Oh, I think because the AI now that's coming out is so good that
Mm-hmm.
companies are going to require fewer like junior software engineers.
Mm-mm.
So it'll be like, senior engineers at the top, and then
Mm-hmm.
like maybe some juniors, but just like a very small number now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's how I'm seeing this industry sort of shake out.
Then like back in 2015, 2016-ish, it was the software engineer role was kind of a very valuable not commodity, but like a very valuable, human resource to have. What do you think that is today then?
I mean, I was always under the impression that software engineering in the future would be akin to kind of like plumbing.
Mm,
Right? And you can imagine at when did they do plumbing? When plumbing started happening, right?
mm-hmm.
Around the world, like plumbers were highly in
Uh-huh.
demand, right? And at
Yeah.
a certain point, it kind of tapers off. I think like software engineering is like not exactly the same, but like it's similar,
Mm-hmm.
And especially now with AI, like it can do so much.
Mm-hmm.
That yeah, I think things are going to the landscape has certainly changed forever.
Okay. So
But that's just me. That's just
yeah, yeah,
me.
yeah. No, no, but I'm really interested to hear this perspective. Like it's similar to plumbing because it's not as valued or
No,
like
no, no. Plumbing is very
okay.
valuable, right?
Yeah.
But it's just you're kind of laying, I don't know, I feel like a lot of like junior engineers, they're doing, they're kind of just like helping lay, like doing sort of, I don't know, more easily replaced things.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Um, I don't know if I'm
But plumbing is
uh
not replaceable right now, right?
what do you mean?
Like I'm trying to I feel like I
Oh,
understand
oh,
the
sorry.
point.
No,
Yeah.
so I mean like that there's plumbing already everywhere. And so
Oh,
for plumbers, like you're really there just like, if there's like a new house, of course you need to help out with that,
yeah.
right? Or new
Yeah.
building. But a lot of the times you're just going back and fixing things.
That's true that.
And
Okay, makes sense.
it's not a good, and like now that I talk more about it, it's not the best analogy, and I don't even know if you should keep this in your podcast. But I
It
just
made
think like
sense.
I think like I liken it to plumbing because the landscape has changed a lot, just like the landscape for plumbing, right? Back when
Mm,
like they were building a lot.
yeah.
Uh and I keep thinking of this in like an American mindset, but
Mm-hmm.
like I think like, after World War II, there was like huge property boom, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can
Mm-hmm.
imagine like a lot of the work there was like that was like really exciting, right? You could go
Mm-hmm.
be a plumber and you'd have so many jobs available to you.
That's
So
true.
much housing was built,
That's
right? I think it's
true.
like that kind. Whereas now, like if you're a plumber, it's just like a regular job.
That's true. That's true. You go and fix things.
Right.
And
Yeah, yeah. Or and like you're not just fixing things, but you're also laying out plumbing for like
that's
new
true.
buildings and stuff. But it's a regular job. And I
Mm-hmm.
think like software engineering is becoming a regular job
Mm-hmm.
versus like back then, like 10 years ago, it was like the hot job to have.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. And it's
Definitely.
never going to, I think, for the foreseeable future, it's still going to be a good job to have,
Mm-hmm.
right? But I think it's going to be more difficult to get into it now
Mm-hmm.
because of AI. So, yeah, that's how I feel.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah. I feel like the metaphor made sense in my head, but I needed a couple of
Yeah.
explanations to
I
like
mean, to be honest, that was not a great metaphor. I just thought
no,
about
no,
it on the
it
fly.
makes sense. It makes sense
Um,
though, and I think that's how I know a lot of software engineering like friends who feel the desire and the urge to upskill by learning more about AI and about LLMs and kind of find a niche that they could be have like this defensible competitive advantage over other software engineers now. And maybe,
Absolutely.
yeah, it's kind of like that for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
So how did you go from software engineer in San Francisco to Japan then?
Yeah, my boyfriend at the time, now husband, was living here, and I'd always wanted to move to or like live in Asia. I loved
Mm-hmm.
living in Singapore.
Mm,
Um, when I was living in San Francisco, I just kept wanting to go back to Asia, like anywhere.
mm,
And so, we were talking, and there's only like a few cities that we were willing to move to, right?
mm-hmm.
And Tokyo was one of them. And I don't know, at the time, this was like what, 20, again, like 2014,
Mm-hmm.
2014, 2015. At the time, like was really hot.
Mm,
And it felt like anyone interested in Asia was learning Chinese and wanting to go to China.
mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to kind of go against that. And,
Mm-hmm.
like when a crowd rushes somewhere, I
Yeah.
always want to see what they left behind. And
Mm-hmm.
I felt like Japan was kind of left behind in a sense, which
Uh-huh.
is like a little ironic because it's still like one of the largest economies in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's just kind of like this quiet sort of thing,
It's
whereas
like,
like China
hi.
was like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Whereas like China's like this, like this hot, like fancy, not fancy, but like this hot, like the new hot thing that everyone's like
Yeah.
trying to get into, right? Um, and yeah, so I thought that honestly I wanted to come and do something where expectations would be low. And I think
Mm,
that's what drew me to software engineering as well, which is like people did not expect anything out of me. It was just like so random and out of the blue. I
mm-hmm.
think like expectations were low, and I like it when expectations are low because I can like very easily surpass them.
Yeah.
And so I kind of liked the idea of going to Japan because, like, what expectation is there of me? I don't speak
Mm-hmm.
Japanese.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I didn't at the time. My husband would say I still don't speak Japanese. Um, and I didn't really know too much about the country.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and yeah, I sort of liked, that idea of like, well, I'll try to make something work here.
Mm-hmm.
And that'll be like the challenge for myself. Yeah.
Wow. It is a
So
ballsy move though to not speak the language and then pack up your bags and move here.
yeah, I mean, in hindsight, now that I have a child, I
Uh-huh.
don't think that I would approve of that myself because, I had like a nice job in San Francisco
Yeah.
that I actually really liked my job. I liked the people that I worked with.
Mm-hmm.
Still in touch with a fair amount of them. And I remember telling my mom, like, hey, there's this guy I'm not married to.
Uh-huh.
And he lives in Japan. So I think I'm gonna quit my fancy job and I think I'm gonna move to Japan where I don't speak the language and I have no job waiting for me. So
Wow.
I don't think I would. I think like if my kid came to me and said that, I think I would really like interrogate the hell out of him. Like, are you sure? Like
Yeah.
that's a crazy thing to do.
Because it was like a good time in San Francisco as well, right? Like,
Yeah, it was a really
yeah.
good time. That was like 2016. That was peak SF.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For
Peak Bay
sure.
Area.
So did you
Yeah.
know that you wanted to start something when you came to Japan?
Yeah, so actually I knew that the whole reason why I went to San Francisco was because I wanted to move to Japan, but I
Mm.
wanted to see how things were done first.
I want to take a quick break to tell you about today's sponsor. You know what's funny? This podcast that you're listening to right now, it actually exists because of the company I'm about to tell you about, InnoHyve. I ran into their founders, Axel and Wannes, at a CIC event in Toronto Hills, and we just started jamming about content creation right there in the lobby. When I mentioned that I was doing these interviews but only posting them on LinkedIn, they both immediately lit up and were like, dude, you should have a podcast. Just start it. We're starting one too. And of course, I had all these excuses, no time, too much editing work, but their enthusiasm and encouragement honestly became the final push I really needed to actually do this. And that's exactly what makes InnoHyve special. These two Belgians aren't just creating another recruitment platform. They're bringing this incredibly refreshing energy to Japan's tech ecosystem. They're building genuine connections between international tech talent and Japanese companies, but doing it with this wonderfully scrappy, build the plane while flying it approach. They're totally open about learning as they go, always asking for feedback, and that's exactly the kind of energy we need more of in Japan. What really sets them apart is how they're laser focused on making sure talented bilingual tech professionals don't just slip through the cracks in Japan. Through their events, seminars, and now their own podcast, they're creating this supportive community where everyone can share their ambitions and challenges openly. So, if you're a tech professional looking to make your mark in Japan, or if you're just running a company that needs a little more international talent, you should check out InnoHyve. And honestly, even if you're not recruiting or whatever, reach out to Axel and Wannes. I always feel so empowered after chatting with them. You can find them in the links in the description below. Now back to our conversation with Yan about transforming tech talent in Japan.
I knew I needed to start something of my own in Japan because software engineers were
Hmm.
not paid very much back then. It's very different now. I think the salaries have risen a bit, but
Hmm.
back then, you were, I think the engineers were making like 3, 4 million yen.
What?
Yeah, and a lot of developers here still do. Like 3, 4 million yen. If you're like a
Hmm.
senior, you're making like 6 or 7 or 8 million yen at a
Why?
Japanese company. Um,
Why is there such a gap in the pay?
I think it's the scope of work, maybe, and also the understanding of what an engineer can bring.
Okay,
A
okay.
few reasons, yeah. And then also just salaries in Japan are lower, right?
Hmm. But even like
So
3, 4 million is low for a job, a technical job, I think, in Japan.
yeah, I mean, I think at the time, software or like coding jobs were seen as kind of like the 3Ks. Like it was dirty, long hours, low pay.
Mm, mm, mm,
Dirty in the sense that like you're just doing really boring remote work, right?
mm, mm, mm.
Uh, Not remote, rote,
Hmm.
boring rote work.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's why the salary's really low.
Oh,
And
okay.
they still are that low. Like some places are still,
Eh,
yeah, some
even
developers are
with
still making that.
even with big tech coming into, but I guess they don't really hire that many software engineers. I
There's
would
not
think
a lot
that
of,
they need to compete with those roles and therefore they'll bring up the salaries, or it doesn't work like that here.
no, I think like when you're fresh out of university here, you're making like 3 to 4 million
Um,
yen,
that's
right?
true. That's true. Yeah, I
Yeah.
see. So you knew that you couldn't secure a software engineering role here because the pay was just too low and it was crap.
Yeah, yeah. And I didn't know. Yeah, at the time, there weren't very many companies here that paid even remotely like
Mm,
similar to what I was making.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, so actually in San Francisco, that's where I met my co-founder and we started
Mm.
working on Code Chrysalis. And so I moved
Oh,
here with the company already set up.
oh, and your
Yeah.
co-founder was in San Francisco.
Yeah, he was also in San Francisco working.
Wow.
Or actually, he wasn't working then. Yeah. And he had gone through the boot camp as well.
Eh,
But he'd gone through it like 2 years after me, and he never worked as a software engineer. He was just like a business person in tech.
wow. Damn. Did you bring it up or did he bring it up? Let's start a
Um,
coding boot camp.
so we no, no, no. So we were put together by mutual friends because
Mm,
they knew that he was looking for someone technical, someone who could start a boot camp
mm-hmm,
and in Japan. And they knew that I was trying to think about what I wanted to do in
mm-hmm,
Japan because I had a boyfriend there.
mm-hmm.
So before, actually, I was in the midst of trying to like set up a bubble tea shop.
In Japan?
Yeah, yeah.
Hey.
And this was before bubble tea was like popular here. So this is like 2014, no, no,
Mm-hmm,
2015, 2016.
mm-hmm,
Yeah. I wanted to do like, because I'm from like Fujian, which is where basically where tea is from.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to take like high quality tea, mix it with Hokkaido milk and do like a really
Wow.
premium milk tea.
Uh-huh,
Um, because I don't otherwise like milk tea. I
uh-huh.
like nice milk tea. There's a lot of bad milk tea out there. And like handmade, not handmade, but like homemade boba.
Yeah, it's different. Yeah, 2016, I think that was before Gongcha. I think they came
Yeah, it
around
was before everything.
2017 and 2018.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
Wow.
I wanted to, yeah, it was like online on like, I think, what was I on? I was on like websites looking at like retail space and stuff.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. It was
What a
gonna be
turn of
called,
events.
I know, it was gonna be called Boba Bitch.
Wait, was that a well-educated decision on the name on
Yeah,
how
I mean, I wanted it to be like, because I think like American swear words have a different,
that's
uh,
true. They're on t-shirts.
they,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, they land differently in Japan, and I wanted it to be like a little bit, like a little bit rebellious.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
The
So,
name Yen would have had a very different meaning,
mm,
far from coding boot camps.
yeah, yeah, but yeah, I wanted to do that. Maybe I'll do it one day, but I've heard that a few years ago. I heard that like the boba industry here is kind of controlled by Yakuza.
I
Like
wouldn't
the
be
Yakuza got
surprised.
into it. That's what
Oh.
I heard. And I heard that from like a few different sources too.
Eh.
So yeah, maybe it was a good thing I didn't get into it. I
Wow.
don't want to be
And
dealing
how
with
long
that.
how long did you run a Code Chrysalis for then?
Ran it from what we started in like 2016, 2017,
Mm-hmm.
all the way until like 2023.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a long time.
And initially it started as a just pure coding boot camp, right?
Yeah, we were just a coding boot camp teaching in English. And then we started doing it in Japanese, and then to Japanese corporates.
Mm,
And then we just really pivoted it to corporate customers.
mm,
So I actually landed our first corporate client. This is around like 2018 was our
mm-hmm,
first corporate client. It was actually Mercari, which is really cool because we had like a nice name from the very beginning.
mm-hmm,
So we did two training sessions with them that were it's like several weeks.
mm-hmm,
So that was pretty cool. And that was the first foray into corporate and what that might look like. So it gave us some
mm-hmm,
good insights. And it just went from there. And during the pandemic, and a little bit after, uh, I pivoted the company to B2B. So
mm,
as in like into corporate, doing corporate
mm-hmm,
training.
mm-hmm,
And it was right around the time where I felt like coding boot camps in Japan were just like really saturated.
mm,
And the job market here just like was not the same. It was
mm-hmm,
dipping a lot. We still have our consumer arm, like the consumer boot camp, and
mm-hmm,
yeah, but it's a very small part of the business now.
mm.
Yeah.
And when you say corporate training, is it like you train existing engineers and like upskill them or like who?
Both. So it's
Oh,
both upskilling and reskilling. And
okay.
actually now the company is going into just helping companies create actual software products. So
Wow.
going in and teaching like an existing team like how to actually create a product.
Mm-hmm.
So it runs the gamut
Mm-hmm.
basically. Yeah.
Damn. And are they like recorded lessons or?
No, there are some recorded lessons,
Mm-hmm.
but for the most part, it's like either remote or in person.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm asking this because like how do you find your lecturers, like the people who teach in
Oh,
Japan? Is that
with difficulty, yeah. And I think something that was helpful having the consumer arm was that was where we got or that is still where we get our instructors from, or
mm,
is, we were able to, through our consumer arm, find people who spoke Japanese,
mm-hmm.
who we were able to train up
Yeah.
ourselves and hire and
Mm-hmm.
employ as instructors. But yeah, very, very difficult because
Yeah.
not only do you need to be speak Japanese, but you need to be able to lecture and like be a good teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a really difficult combination. And then you also need to be willing to work for like a kind of a kooky gaishike, right?
Yeah.
Um, or foreign company. Um, so it's a mix, and We have been very lucky to have some really great instructors.
Mm,
Yeah, but in the beginning, I was teaching everything. Not everything. We
wow.
had also had like other instructors, but yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I taught for a while. And I think
Mm-hmm.
it was important for me to teach because
Mm-hmm.
I needed to have a good gauge of how things were landing.
Mm-hmm.
And then I eventually stopped because just so much was going on.
Mm-hmm.
I miss teaching a lot though.
What do you think makes a good teacher at Code Chrysalis? What do
I
you
think
look
it's
for?
Yeah, I think it's a few things. I think you need to be bringing a sort of energy. It doesn't have to be like super high energy, but just an energy and enthusiasm.
Mm,
I think another one is definitely not giving people answers, but guiding people to find and get their brains coming up with a solution or an
mm,
idea.
mm-hmm.
So helping mold basically rather than just giving answers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think those are two just really important characteristics of
Mm-hmm.
a good teacher. And then I think also because a fair amount of our students are coming from, nothing,
Mm,
as in like coming from, no technical background,
mm-hmm.
and they're adults, I think having an empathy of like understanding how difficult it is to learn something when you're an adult.
Mm,
Yeah, it's like a totally new way of thinking.
mm-hmm.
Uh, so having empathy and patience to help and support people as they are just rewiring their brains in a way
Mm-hmm.
to understand how to do this.
That's
I
true.
think those are some important qualities that we look for.
The second point you mentioned about not giving answers but guiding someone, can you elaborate a bit more what that looks like? Is it like asking leading questions or
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
okay.
Yeah, asking leading questions, having confidence that someone will be able to figure it out.
Mm,
Right.
mm,
So I think in the beginning, trying to do a lot of like, I do, we do, you do. So
mm-hmm,
like I'll do it and then we do it and then you do it.
mm,
That sort of method. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't think I was perfect, but definitely trying to make sure that you're not just giving people an answer book
mm-hmm,
because the issue with coding is that it's not like if you get stuck on something, your
mm-hmm.
boss is going to be like, here's how you do it. Like, here's the
Yeah,
answer key, right? Like, you have to actually figure it out.
that's
And there's
true.
no one else to really do it for you,
Mm-hmm.
right? So maybe there's a senior engineer that you can ask, but that person also, she has to also figure it out
That's true.
herself, right?
That's
So
true.
it's like teaching people how to have that not self-confidence, but like that I can't find the words, but just like being able to rely on yourself
Mm-mm.
and understanding how to come to like an answer
Interesting.
solution.
That's true. That's probably a really big part, like the belief that this person is capable of finding the answer themselves as well. Like
Yeah.
that mentality. I feel like
No.
you could easily split humans into people who feel like I need to give the answer versus people who are willing to let that person be and figure it out themselves. Like
Yeah.
those are very different.
Yeah. It was a really tough thing to do because I think for some of our students, that was just like a new thing. Like they
Mm,
weren't used to the teacher not fully giving you the answer.
mm,
And I think also for teachers, it can be very tiring when you're going through that motion all the time. Like you just really want to tell them.
yeah.
And it can be quite frustrating, but yeah,
Hmm.
having like that control to hold off.
Mm, I see. And since then you've stepped away.
I have. Yeah. I had been wanting to do other things for a while. I think
Hmm.
this is the longest job that I'd ever had. And it wasn't
Hmm.
like one job, it was multiple jobs, but I think for me, I get really concerned when my identity is wrapped up too tightly with something
Mm-hmm.
because then it feels like you're just like you're in like a corner,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I really wanted to question like who am I and what can I do outside of like this project, this company that has like fully encompassed my life, like
Mm-hmm.
it, and is what I'm known for in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what am I capable of outside of this? Who am I? And
Yeah.
I think for a while I've been wanting to leave.
Mm.
The job was getting less fun and more like I was also getting really antsy and frustrated with like, what I want to do outside. And
Mm-hmm.
also I wanted to start a family.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I ended up taking the plunge. Although as one of the owners, you can't exactly just say like, "Hey, here's my 2 weeks," right?
Mm-hmm.
So I remember telling my mentors, like really like saying it aloud to my mentors and to my husband, like, I need to leave this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then working with them to figure out a plan for me to actually leave.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think after I said that verbally, it took about a year for me to get out.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think uh yeah, that it feels like so long ago too, which is really incredible.
It's been
But
a
it was only
year and
about
a half.
yeah, I think about a year and a half, a little less than a
Mm.
year and a half. Yeah. So it finally took me a while, but I finally got out, which
Mm.
I'm really thankful for because I know a lot of entrepreneurs are stuck at their company because they're like the only ones, right?
Mm.
And they want to get out, but like there's no one to take it on or to sell it
Yeah.
to or whatnot.
Yeah.
So I'm really grateful that I get to like step out and be just participating like on the side,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that it frees up my time. And then right like a few weeks after I think announcing it to the executive team that we
Mm.
had, or like a couple months later, like I found out I was pregnant. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, so I was like, ah, this is amazing timing. Like this is
Yeah.
very good. And yeah, I was like trying to do as little as possible towards the end.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Just like pushing everything off to other people,
That's true.
so I could leave. Yeah.
That's true. Did you ever have like a fear of if I leave, everything's gonna crumble, or if I leave, I'm never gonna have this experience ever? Do you know what I mean? Like when you leave something and you're afraid to leave it because it'll never come back again, or
Oh yeah, I think I didn't think that the company would crumble. Like I don't think that
mm,
was like a big fear of mine.
mm,
And I think it's because there are so many things that make Code Chrysalis quite resilient as a company.
mm,
Um, and I trust my co-founder as well.
mm-hmm,
It was good to make sure that, he was going to be there to see it through.
mm-hmm,
I think for me, it was facing the fear of like, ooh, am I going to be able to do this?
mm,
But then, the other thing that I'm thinking of like is like, does that actually also, aren't there other forms of success as well besides
mm,
like having a company of whatever size, right?
yeah,
And so I think for me, it's going back to where I usually like to start off again, which is like from nothing, and
mm,
then redefining success for me.
mm-hmm,
And so for this past year, it's been motherhood.
mm-hmm,
And then I think for the next step of my journey, I still need to figure out what that is.
mm-mm. That's true. That's
Yeah.
true.
But it is daunting and
Yeah.
anxiety ridden.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever I do feel anxious or scared, I try to like center myself and tell myself like this is a part of it. Like
Mm-hmm.
this anxiety or this fear that is like a part of this whole journey because I
Mm-hmm.
remember the anxiety and the fear that I had during all those transitions.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really believe that if you want some kind of big change, you need to
Mm-hmm.
take a massive risk.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's really thinking of like, what is the right risk for me to take
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
for this transition? So, this past year and a half, that big risk for me, or these past 2 years, that big risk for me was leaving Code Chrysalis.
Mm-hmm.
And the return that I've got is motherhood and being able to spend time with my son,
Mm-hmm.
and really enjoy like the first few months of motherhood.
Mm-hmm.
And then now I think the next step is like taking a risk again into doing
Mm-hmm.
some other entrepreneurial thing. So,
Mm-hmm. For
yeah.
sure. What are some like questions that you ask yourself when you're evaluating that risk and whether or not it's worth taking?
Um, I think that's a really great question, and I think I need to be better about that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because I have so many things that I want to do
Mm-hmm.
and so many interests.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for me, it's like, does this align with my values? And
Mm-hmm.
is this something that I like? I'm looking for a particular feeling. Like there's a feeling that you get when you're like, oh, this is like the right thing. And no matter what other people say about it, like
Mm-hmm.
I don't care. Like this is, I think I'm really right.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's like the second feeling of, or the second thought of like, um, the second thought of like, can I like, of like, I can't stop coming up with ideas for this.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm like ideating so much. I have so many things that I want to do for this thing. And I
Mm-hmm.
think like those two together, like that's like a
Mm-hmm.
feeling that I'm looking for
Mm-hmm.
on like one topic,
That's
right?
true.
On this
Mm-hmm.
one topic, I just have like a whole host of ideas of like
Mm-hmm.
what I could do. And I have a good feeling about it. So I think I found it. And I just need to get going a little bit more once my life is a little less chaotic. Yeah.
So you have like a space that you're eyeing right now.
Yeah, it's similar to like coding boot camp. This is
Mm.
also something that's like been a hobby of mine. A
Mm-hmm.
hobby of mine before Code Chrysalis and all of that was teaching.
Mm-hmm.
I'd always loved teaching.
Yeah.
Um, so I was like teaching for fun in San Francisco. Before that, like I taught like whiskey tasting and bartending in
Yeah.
university so it was
Wow.
always my side hustle. And then this is another kind of like hobby of mine, that I think I'm gonna try to go into and make it like an ad. See if I can make a little bit of money out of it. I don't know, or
Mm-hmm.
like create some influence.
Whiskey
Um,
tasting.
no, not whiskey tasting.
Okay,
Something
okay.
like totally different. Yeah.
Okay.
It has to do with like women's health.
Okay, okay.
Uh,
Well, everyone is gonna stay tuned and be excited for when it
well,
goes
we'll see.
wrong.
We'll see if it actually works.
Yeah, but definitely the feeling that you're describing, I feel like you probably wouldn't have felt in commodities trading, I think, for you at least.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's kind of scary. I think a lot of us who have that sense of I want to do something entrepreneurial, I want to start something of my own, are kind of like looking for that very intrinsic feeling of interest and passion. And I think you
Mm,
phrase it very well. It's like this this like endless desire, this like very natural desire to keep thinking and ideating on that topic, and it feels like there's no end. And it's kind of
yeah.
it feels like breathing almost. It's so natural to you to think about more things about that topic. Yeah,
Hmm.
for
Yeah.
sure. I want to talk a little bit more about the role of like engineers and engineering in Japan, since you have a lot of experience there. Um, you've talked about like different concepts of what makes a real engineer in Japan versus the US, particularly at the junior level. In Japan,
Hmm.
new engineers often go through like a 6 month training program, while in the US, they're kind of expected to contribute more quickly, I think.
Yeah.
Is this this is something that you've seen.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. Yeah.
Mm,
Like, yeah. When we moved here to start the company, it was because we were seeing this, which was
mm,
these engineers are low paid because they're not doing, very like high value or like
mm,
contributive work. Um, yeah. And whereas in the US, like when you're hired, you're just really expected to hit the ground running. Like you already
Mm,
know how to code, you already know like quite a fair amount of basics, whereas in Japan you start from kind of zero. I think the expectation is you don't need to know anything. Like you start from
mm,
zero and then you're taught on the job.
mm,
And the downside to that is like if unless you come from a computer science background, if you go into a job as a developer and they teach you those things,
mm,
you're not necessarily getting taught all the things that you need to know to be
mm,
able to move your career forward or to have
mhm,
like some career stability because it's again like very particular to that company that you're in, right?
mm. That's
So maybe you're
true.
taught to do things in this one particular way for this one company, but this makes it a liability because if something happens and you need to change jobs, you have to
Mm,
basically start from scratch, right?
that's true.
And
That's
you
true.
don't have as good of an understanding of fundamentals to
Mm,
help you make that switch. So we
mm,
really wanted to imbue people with the fundamentals so that they could you could just go and uh, go and get started. And
mm,
also the meta learning aspect
mhm,
of software engineering, like how do you learn another language
mm.
quickly? How do you get started on something quickly? Like that was always a big part of our philosophy.
So would you say that most software engineers in Japan are kind of like, I mean, that's the same for like most jobs in Japan, but like in one company forever, learning that company's systems and it's not transferable to anywhere else. Is that kind of the case?
Yeah, that's definitely the case. I would say, like, if you are a foreigner in Japan or looking into Japan, you
Yeah.
might not see that, right?
Hmm.
Because the companies that are more like um, Fang-like
Mm,
are the ones that are Fangy, right? Like
yeah.
Google, et cetera. And if you're a foreigner, those are the companies that you're seeing. So you might not act, you might think like, oh yeah, the salaries are fine. Like
Right.
oh, like there's such great engineers there, but that's just like a small piece of what is like the rest of the industry, right?
Mm,
Um, I think most people are in these large companies like the Mitsuis, the
hmm.
Mitsubishis, et cetera. Not to like, I'm just saying like random names, but
Hmm. Like
they're
the
in like
Zaibatsus,
these
the big companies.
yeah, the Zaibatsus, right? Where you're there and you're focusing on like one particular thing. Like I
Mm,
remember meeting someone who was an engineer at one of the printing companies, like one of the
hmm.
printer companies,
Hmm.
and his job was to write the drivers to connect the printer to a computer.
Oh,
And that's
okay.
all he knew to do. So, like, if you asked him to do any sort of coding outside of that, like,
Yeah.
he had no idea. But all he could do was
Mm,
just connect. That was just his specialty, right?
yeah.
And that's great if you love that and like you decide to specialize in that. But it's
Yeah.
not great if like you're stuck and you want to get out.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And why is this the norm? Why is this the role of engineers in Japan, do you think?
Oh, wow. There's a lot of reasons for that,
I
I
mean, the
think.
first one is like the assembly line mentality, right? That's what
Yeah,
it's always.
yeah, very much the assembly line, like the Monozukuri mentality. Um, man, I do a whole lecture on this, but it basically goes back to, there's a few things. It goes back to how hardware is has been more highly valued in Japan than
Mm,
software,
mm-hmm,
right? And so they treat software like they would with hardware, where you're on
mm,
an assembly line, right?
mm,
And you focus on like this one specific thing.
yeah.
So that's like one part of it. Another one is the fact that with the whole Zaibatsu system, there just hasn't been many opportunities for pure tech companies to arise, like
Mm,
software companies.
mm,
So
mm,
usually when you're building some SaaS product here, you are in like an SI or in a system integrator,
mm, mm,
building a very customized specific thing for a customer, right?
mm, mm-hmm,
That's like within like your little family of companies.
mm-hmm,
And so if you are a standalone SaaS company, it's really difficult to edge your way into these
mm-hmm.
businesses
Yeah.
because they are all using SIers, and these
Mm,
SIers really control what technologies are getting used, right?
mm-hmm.
They want to do it all.
That's true.
So like Slack probably wouldn't really have come about from Japan
Mm-hmm.
because if there had been a Slack, it would have been something internal for a
That's true.
specific company that they wouldn't want to share somewhere else, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, I hear about these SIers time and time again and how it's like such a Japan unique thing to
Yeah.
exist.
Yeah. People don't know what system integrators are outside of Japan. It's a
So they
Japan
just don't
special.
exist.
They do to some form, but not in the same way that they are in Japan,
Okay.
right? So you have like service providers in other countries where like they will help your company figure out, like what you need,
Yeah.
and like hook up your computer systems for you and stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
for the most part, it's not to the extent where you're like, hey,
Um,
I need to make this, like, let's outsource it to like this company that also set up our servers or whatnot.
mm.
Yeah. I think also like because Japan went through that big like bubble, right, where there's so
Mm.
many of these big companies popping up,
Mm-hmm.
um, like that whole like back then companies had like their own servers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so these companies are so old
Mm-hmm.
that they really do need an SIer because of that, like all this infrastructure
Oh.
that they have, right?
Uh-huh.
If you're a company in the US, you probably weren't as advanced back
Mm-hmm.
then. But it's a lot easier now for you to instead of having your own servers, you're
Mm-hmm.
just putting it all on AWS
That's
or Azure or
true.
whatever, right?
That's true. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've also heard like I think it was around the bubble era too when IBM was trying to enter Japan and the government was like, oh, we can't have like an American company having this like chokehold on Japanese companies. SIers, we're going to
Mm,
fund so many of these SIers to kind of make it customized for a very cheap price so that Zaibatsus buy the customized SIer version of what IBM was trying to provide. And that's kind of how we have the tech industry today in
yeah.
Japan as well.
Yeah,
But
it goes pretty deep. And if you think about it, like it runs through also education, right?
mm-hmm.
So the way that the university systems are, for a while, they had quotas.
Mm,
So they had quotas, so that, in engineering,
yeah.
the computer science department was underneath engineering and was competing with electrical, mechanical, etc. Right? So they'd be
Oh.
competing for headcount. And so if like, electrical, mechanical, et cetera, like they had more people,
Mm-hmm.
then they got more funding. So then your computer science school just has fewer
No. Yeah,
fewer funds, right, to deal with.
that's
And
true.
there was also a bit of a competition, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like if there's only so many students, then
Mm-hmm.
like you want to pull as many of your students away to like
Yeah.
your school so you can get more funding, et cetera. Um, so it
Wow.
goes pretty deep. And then
Damn.
I think another reason is just in San Francisco, you see this really deeply where there is like a direct connection between the PhD programs at Berkeley and Stanford and like the companies in San Francisco, right? If you
Mm-hmm.
have like Berkeley PhD in computer science, like you are guaranteed job. I don't know about now, but like
Yeah.
probably still, but you are
Mm-hmm.
guaranteed like a high paying job,
Mm-hmm.
right? At
Mm-hmm.
like some fancy company.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the case here. You are
Mm,
not making like some crazy, you're not making like, 40 million yen straight
mm-hmm.
out of your PhD program,
That's true.
right?
That's true.
So that lack of a connection,
Mm-hmm.
I think also impedes like kind of explains, the
Yeah.
the current state of
I
stuff in
guess
Japan.
so. I guess like the return to like the ROI to getting that degree and comp sci maybe is also a lot lower. Like the
Yeah,
financial incentive of a high paying job. Wow.
absolutely.
Do you think
I
it's
mean,
go
mhm.
on, go on.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a computer science student coming out of Todai, you
Yeah,
don't want to be a software engineer, you want to be a manager,
that's true. That's
right?
true. But that's not the case in Japan. I don't think so. Not yet, at least.
No, I think that's it. That is true. Like, I think those people, like, they don't want to stay engineers, they want to stay
Yeah.
managers.
Yeah, I was
Maybe it's changing now because of like there's more, or there were
mm,
more jobs, but.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I was saying like even if they get like a doctorate or whatever, they oftentimes don't become managers like they want to. It's like,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
sure
they
that's
just end
also.
up in the same like maybe they'll have like a hiring premium, but they're usually still at the entry level 신소득 type positions.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I was wondering if do you think it's possible for a like a US trained type software engineer that is not as like highly specialized on one specific aspect of something to do well in Japan? Is that type of talent? Is there a place for that type of talent in Japan?
Oh yeah, I think yeah, for sure. I think if you are if you had a job as a software engineer in the US, it's
Mm,
much, much easier for you to get a job in Japan.
okay.
I'm not as up to date on current market trends. I
Mm,
know that I know that there's not as many companies out there right now hiring.
mm,
So it could be a little bit, I think the situation could just be like kind of depressing for everyone
mm-hmm,
still.
mm-hmm,
Like I haven't heard a pickup in the markets yet, in the
mm,
job
mm.
markets yet.
Okay.
But there's definitely jobs out there.
Mm-hmm,
And so I think for people who are interested, it's to come over and network and get
mm,
to know the space and the companies here. And I think
mm-hmm.
it's also important to understand the community and meet people in the community
That's true.
if they can, if they're serious about it.
Definitely.
I've come across a lot of people who've waxed poetic about Japan and wanting to. That this is like the big thing on the internet, right? Which is like, I really want to go and buy an Akia and
Yeah.
like live this like nice Japan, like this nice Japan
Mm-hmm,
life, and like, and there's a lot of people who maybe visited Japan once or twice, maybe even three times for a few
mm-hmm.
weeks, right?
Yeah.
Who want to come and live here.
Mm-hmm,
And I worry about those people because
mm-hmm,
if you have this romantic view of any country or any culture,
mm-hmm.
at some point you're going to get hit with reality, which is
Yeah.
Japan is any other country. It is any other culture. It
hmm
has good and it has bad,
Yeah,
right?
for sure. For
And so I
sure.
see foreigners like when they struggle to stay here and when they burn out, it's
hmm
because the honeymoon has ended and they
Yeah.
realize like there's also not great things about living here. And
hmm
it was something that they hadn't factored in, right?
hmm
And yeah, so I think for anyone looking to move here, just be realistic,
Yeah,
right? It's like,
for
I don't know,
sure.
it's like Tokyo syndrome. It's like
Yeah.
like you know, like how there's Paris syndrome,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Like I think a lot of like white techies have like Tokyo syndrome. Like they're predominantly white techies.
Yeah.
At least like that's what has been popping up in my radar, in my
hmm
timelines. But
Definitely, for sure.
yeah, they have
It's a
Tokyo
good,
syndrome.
yeah, it's definitely a good like midterm staying place, I think, Japan. I think long term is a lot more rare, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
people really don't realize how difficult it is to integrate into
Yeah.
society,
hmm
especially Americans, because America is so like, you're American, you
Yeah,
know?
that's true.
And yeah, that just isn't it's just a totally different, yeah, this Japan has a long culture. I mean, I'm Chinese, so I understand it, right? Like
hmm
you don't just get to go like I'm Chinese, just because you've
Yeah,
lived there for a long time.
that's
But it's like a
true.
long, long history, long culture. Like
hmm
you can't
Definitely.
just go and like integrate into just like this totally different world.
hmm
Yeah. So
Definitely.
I see a lot of foreigners doing that. And I just always I really want to pull them aside and be like, you can stay here. Like if you keep going on this track, like you're gonna have trouble staying here.
hmm
Yeah.
But
Like
I think
someone's
it also takes like you realizing it for yourself as well, like going through that experience and
yeah, I
yeah.
don't know. Or sometimes they never realize it. Like,
Yeah.
they'll be like, oh, they loved it. Be like, no, they didn't.
No.
They're gonna talk shit about you behind your
No.
back. Behind your back
For
now.
sure, for sure. Um,
Yeah.
on the topic of like characteristics of Japan. I'm kind of like switching back to kind of more engineering talk here, but
Yeah, yeah,
like
sorry.
No, not at all, but like Japan is like historically known to be like more, I think the word term is like waterfall more than agile when it
Mm.
comes to like tech because of its like past and automobiles and assembly line like we talked about. But I want to ask like from your experience like interacting with these like bigger Japanese companies, like is this true? Like is this kind of the main mindset that they have when it comes to software engineering as well?
Yes, I would say it's a lot more of an agile framework, sorry, waterfall framework, which is
Mm-hmm.
like, you hand things off from group to group.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think Japan needs to find its own way of working on
Mm-hmm.
software that works for it.
Mm-hmm.
I always get the feeling that the agile that is taught here can sometimes feel very Western and very
Oh,
American. And
how?
oh man, this is like a hot take that I have, and I understand if people disagree with me, but this is my hot take, which
Mm-hmm.
is a lot of agile comes from the US and comes
Mm-hmm.
from a very Western way of working,
Mm-hmm.
where you just have a different idea of like how to make decisions and what sort
Mm-hmm.
of risks to take,
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. And I think it can sometimes go against the way that Japanese people do things. And I've heard people say, like, no, no, that means you're doing agile wrong. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, like the way that it's taught and the things that are, I think it can kind of not factor into the Japanese way of doing things. And Japan makes great stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I was recently out of the country, and what do you have it? Like I saw a lot of Japanese things. I was in Chile. So
Okay.
and I have my kid got sick. And what do I find in Chile? I find diapers from Mary's there. And I find like a lot of Japanese like medical stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And in that sense, thank God it's Japanese. Like
Mm-hmm.
this country is associated with it might not be associated with like super, super cutting edge, like cool, risky stuff, but it's
Mm-hmm.
associated with like stuff that I want to depend on,
Yeah.
stuff that I can depend on, right? The
Mm-hmm.
stuff that like is really important that you need. And the way that I think Silicon Valley has been creating software has been very much like, like fail fast, right? And I think
Mm-hmm.
I don't disagree with that, but I think that there needs to be a middle ground when it comes to the Japanese way of working, and that
Mm-hmm.
they shouldn't just like blindly adopt Agile.
Mm-hmm.
They need to find their own Agile.
Mm.
And
I
I
have a
am not
question.
Japanese, so I can't say what that is.
Yeah.
But I think Japanese companies create amazing products that are
Mm-hmm.
really stable and dependable and long lasting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that for software, like I think that there is an opportunity for Japan here to figure out how to create reliable software that is,
Mm-hmm.
we hear all about like these data leaks and like,
Mm-hmm.
this hacking that's and stuff like that. And I think this is where Japan could potentially thrive once they
Mm-hmm.
find their own mojo.
Yeah. I I like this hot take, first of all. I think it's very
Oh,
interesting.
thank you.
Thank you for sharing. But I'm also really curious. I'm sure you've seen it kind of butting heads, like the desire to adopt this agile framework versus what the incumbent framework or mentality or culture of working is like, and those two kind of conflicting with each other. But what does that look like in practice? Like, is it like things people are like using these words and the people, the subordinates don't understand what the manager is trying to say when they say the word agile, or like what does that look like?
Very simply, it's maybe you have one team in a company that operates in an agile way, but the rest of the company doesn't. So then you're still within the bureaucracy and red tape of the rest of the company, right?
Okay.
So, great example is we had a customer, and agile is not just like a tech only thing. It's like
Mm, mm,
I don't know if I can talk about that. Yeah, anyhow, that's what I'm seeing. So like even if
mm,
you have your engineers working in an agile way, like
yeah.
the rest of the functions around them don't.
That's true. So decision making everywhere else is still not in an agile way.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Interesting. I wonder what that looks like the Japanese way of,
Oh, like what this like theoretical, sorry,
yeah,
not this hypothetical thing that I'm talking
yeah,
about. Yeah, I don't know. But like I think Japanese people came up with the whole like Kaizen thing,
yeah.
right? And I think it'll be something just as groundbreaking, and we're just waiting for what that's going to look like.
So far, we've kind of like bashed software engineering, and in fact, no, it's probably just me.
Have we? No,
No, no,
I
not
have
at
not
all.
bashed it. It's a very important
It's very
skill.
important for sure, and there are plenty of like really talented software engineers in Japan as well.
Mhm.
But are there any aspects that are very fundamentally Japanese that actually go really well with software engineering, like in
Ooh,
what
that's
you've
a
noticed?
great question. Um, I think things that go well, quality control. Japan has
Mm,
great quality control.
hmm
And I think that goes well with software engineering. If I think there's still, I think like that has not been fully married with software engineering yet, but I
mm,
think that could be. Um, let's see, quality control. Another one is Japan has really great user experience outside
mm.
of software, right?
Yes,
Like,
like an
you know
onigiri
what I mean?
from the
Yeah,
community. Yeah.
exactly. It's so thoughtful, like just the way that the wrapping is done, right?
hmm
Or even just your restaurant experience, right? Your
Why is it
average
so bad
restaurant
in
experience.
SaaS then? Or like software
Um,
engineering?
I think it's just yeah, I don't know. I have a lot there could be a lot of guesses, but I think it's the same thing that's keeping the rest of engineering down, right?
Mm,
Um, People have said that it's also because, for example, like because of the characters, like Japanese like to see like a lot of
mm,
stuff on the screen. They're able to parse through that faster. I don't know
hmm
how true that is.
hmm
But I think, yeah, user experience
mm. So
once
much.
applied,
Yeah,
it has not been really applied yet, but once applied,
that's true.
I think it could be really great.
Mm,
There's also a sense of responsibility, I think, that people
mm,
have, which is why people don't take as many risks here, right? Compared
mm,
to Western nations, or at least with the US. And I
hmm
think it's because people have a very strong sense of responsibility and accountability,
Yeah.
um, for the most part. And I am generalizing. There's always people in the comments who are like, that's not true. Like, there's this, but I'm like being very, like, I'm stereotyping,
Mm, mm,
basically, right?
hmm
So yeah, I think those are some things that Japan could
mm.
be really good at.
Very,
Yeah.
very interesting. Yeah, I've always wondered about that user experience thing. Part of me wonders if it's like a tangible and intangible type difference, like things we eat and things we touch
Yeah.
versus things we just see. And I
Yeah, I honestly think it's just like not as many people are
mm,
doing UI UX, right, for
hmm
software,
That's true.
right? Because I think right now for Japanese young people, it's cooler to if you have like that creative sense, it's
Mm,
cooler for you to be an interior designer.
that's true. That's
Right.
true.
So like that talent isn't going into UI UX.
hmm
And I really think that that's the reason why
That's true. With
it's
more
not
people,
great.
more brains.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Um, I have one final question before my closing questions.
Hmm.
This one is a bit more about like the grander scale of software engineering talent, I think.
Hmm.
I don't want it to sound kind of like echo chambery because it's a very like real and I think kind of sobering topic. Like around 22% of Japan's IT engineers are female, and this is actually higher than the US, which was 18% from my research. And you've also kind of spoken publicly about becoming technical can enable social mobility, especially for women. So, from your experience, what does becoming technical have to do with an individual's like value within society, do you think?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I don't want to equate being more technical as being more valuable.
Mm,
But I think women, and yeah, like I don't want to equate that. I don't think they're, I think like some of the beauty with having more women in engineering is that you just have a more diverse way of thinking about things.
mm-hmm,
And stereotypically, women have like better soft skills,
mm-hmm,
stereotypically. And I think a big part of being like a successful software engineer is having the right soft skills. It's for any career, right? It's having the
mm-hmm,
soft skills to be able to cooperate.
mm-hmm,
Because when you're an engineer, you are on a team for sure. So you
mm-hmm.
need to learn how to cooperate and do
Yeah.
teamwork and all of that. I think it is important for social mobility though, because so many women end up being in careers that really have like a timeline to them, like
Mm,
a deadline to them, right?
mm-hmm,
And I think women also, this isn't a study done. Women are in roles that are like the first to go in the AI revolution, right?
mm, mm,
And I think it's important for women to gain some technical skills so that they can better prepare themselves and have a better
mm-hmm,
understanding of what's to come.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely, for sure. And I can see, maybe you feel this way too, but I see the potential for that in Japan, especially.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. But it's also hard because there's still the social like social like the gender stereotypes around jobs is still so big in Japan.
Yeah.
Engineering and women are like so far from each other still, I think.
Yeah. And I think that leads to some scenarios where I feel like sometimes Japanese women who move into more tech spaces or move into more male dominated spaces, not just tech, and
Mm,
definitely not all, but they will want to differentiate themselves. Like, I'm not a regular girl, I'm a cool girl, right?
mm,
And I see that happening, and it's really disheartening
mm,
that they because and I understand why they do it. I think I
mm,
also did it at one point.
mm,
You want to like detach yourself from like
mm,
those, people's like bad ideas that
mm.
you end up like kind of you end up exaggerating the
Mm,
same oppressive thoughts that
that's
kept
true.
you right. You're content. What's the word? You're like I can't think right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I know what you mean though. It's like kind of reverse stereotyping in a way, like
Yeah,
and
not no, not I think it's just internalized misogyny, right?
mm-hmm,
And you're just perpetuating, that's the word, perpetuating the same
mm,
thing, right?
mm-hmm.
You're just continue to be perpetuating that
That's true.
misogyny by being like, I'm a cool girl because I can code, or I'm a
That's
cool girl
true.
because I'm, in this job.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard it before. Like I remember being in a networking event, and one of the organizers, who's a friend of mine, was like, "Oh, we're so happy that we had like these four women show up because there's
Mm,
usually never any women, and we're really glad that you guys are all here,
mm.
and we welcome you." And then one of the women said, "Oh, I'm a woman on the outside, but I'm a man on the inside." Ha 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 ha.
Oh.
And I thought like, "Oh dear, that's not good, you know." That's
But
unfortunate.
yeah, but it also probably comes from constantly being surrounded by those stereotypes, so it's very
Yeah.
internalized, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's so internal, and we all have some form of internalized
Yeah,
misogyny, right?
definitely. For
Yeah.
sure. It would be interesting to see how this whole like understanding of these jobs and these gender roles kind of evolve in Japan as well. Hopefully in a good way, where more people can do the things that they want to do because they want to do it rather than
Yeah, for
because of other
sure.
motivations.
For
For
sure.
sure. So now I have three closing questions for you.
Hmm.
The first one is, what is a book that you'd recommend?
Ooh, so many. just one book. I think everyone should read Invisible Women.
Okay.
I think that that was such an eye-opening book for me,
Mm,
because you don't realize how the world is just so not built for women,
mhm,
and to like a shocking degree. So
mhm.
I think that that's a really great book to read.
Okay. So it's about, is it like a nonfiction, let's analyze how the world is?
Yeah, it's a nonfiction book about how the world is not designed for women. So it talks about all of these things that, all of these like design issues that put women at risk.
Mm,
Not just design, but also just like how this world is not as inclusive of women.
hmm
Like, for example, medical data, there's not a lot of data. So there's not a lot
mm,
of research on
hmm
how different chemicals or different household cleaning products will actually
hmm
react with
hmm
women, things like that. So it covers that, all of that.
hmm
Yeah. So it's
That's
so
really good.
important for men and women to read.
Hmm For sure. And it's like not always like a political discussion. It's just like the world was just not designed in a way that incorporated or took women into account. Like when you think about
Yeah.
clinical trials until like the 70s or 80s, I think it never or didn't need to require women in them at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, for sure.
for sure. The second question is, what's your favorite neighborhood in Tokyo for getting work done?
For getting work done. Oh man, there's so many. Um, I don't know. I don't really have a place in Tokyo that I, recommend. Tokyo is just so full of like
Mm,
nice coffee shops.
that's true.
Um, that yeah, and they're everywhere. I mean,
Yeah.
this is such a great life. So this is why I can't really leave Japan. Um,
And free Wi-Fi at all of these places.
yeah, free Wi-Fi. There's like what I love about Tokyo now is like it's becoming more dog friendly. So I can take
Mm.
my dog. Yeah, it's great. So many.
So many
Yeah.
places. And the last
Yeah.
question is, how can our audience be helpful to you?
I think if anyone is interested in women's health, please reach out to me. Would love to hear from you. Specifically menstruation. It's a fun topic.
Hmm
And then also, I just love meeting people and getting to know their stories. So people should just reach out if they're curious, if they want to meet up, anything. Yeah, always looking to meet new people.
Sounds good. I'll link all of Yan's socials in the description below. And that's all the questions that I have for you today. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for coming to the interview.
Thank you for having me.